Reactive training systems.
I wanted to kind of touch base, circle the wagons, whatever metaphor you want to put in here. Have a conversation with you after, you had such a really successful year. Like your year in powerlifting this year has been phenomenal. And kind of the capstone on all of that is a successful run at the World Championships this year, where you won first place at the M183 class. You had a PR total, lifetime personal best total at the World Championships to win your weight class, become a world champ, and also become best lifter of the competition, beating out a lot of stiff competition. No slouches. The Masters Worlds this year,
No.
So that's a hell of a capstone on a successful year. And I mean, you and I have known each other a long time, and we've kind of followed along your arc this year. We did a podcast earlier this year about a lot of the lessons that you've learned along the way, kind of compare and contrast our approaches, because you and I have both kind of overcome some injury issues, derailing us pretty bad. I guess let me turn it over to you a little bit, and maybe we should start by talking about the lead up to competition. What is training like for you? When does like the mentality shift and you start thinking, okay, this is the prep, this is where I'm getting ready for world?
Well, I suppose if you're to look at it from a programming basis, I've been able to stumble along to or arrive at a 3 block sequence that I feel works pretty well. I ran it. uh, I ran it going into nationals with a twist, and then based on what I learned about it going into nationals, tweaked it a little bit going into worlds. So I suppose at the start of that first block, that's kind of the start of the shift. But in all honesty, like I've grown to a place where I'm pretty consistent, and I don't necessarily go into training and be like, "Oh, this is for worlds. Let's fucking go." Because for
Right.
me, when I allow myself to get too like excited like that, that excitement starts to drive my decision making, and that usually leads to overreaching and more fatigue and not a productive and responsive training. So I really try and not necessarily deny the emotions that might come up in terms of like, oh wow, I get to go to worlds or something like that, but more be more aware of it and kind of like have a moment with it, but not like use it. Like how a lot of people use that for motivation and things of that nature. If I use that for motivation to train and train harder, it will I'll train too hard. And so learning where that I suppose tipping point is for myself has been really beneficial. And in all honesty, like it's still like an ongoing thing. Like I have to manage it all the time. Like it's not one of those things that like, oh, here's the line, just don't cross it. No, here's the line. You have to constantly actively not cross it. And like it shows up a lot, like especially in training leading to worlds, because I was hitting lots of PRs. And there was one point where I was starting to get just a little bit too aggressive, and I had to pull back a little bit. And there's times and cues and signs from my body physically that will remind me of that, and I have to be really respectful of those. And when I am, it usually has a pretty positive outcome and heads in the right direction. But if I'm not, well, then I fall back into some of those old patterns and habits and behaviors and just try and power through everything.
So what kinds of things do you look for would signal to you that maybe you're letting things go too hot?
Obviously, there's going to be like some of the physical signs in terms of like being aware of your fatigue level, and if you're starting to get some aches and pains that are coming on, they're not necessarily, I wouldn't categorize them as injuries, but they're not necessarily part of your baseline. And so just being aware of like where that baseline is and allowing that to remind you to take a little off the top. You don't have to stop training. You don't have to drop a bunch of training, but you just have to be like, oh, okay, today's not a day for aggression. Even if I feel good, today is not a day for aggression just because it's building. The pressure's building.
That's a hard thing to do in practice. I would say it's a mature attitude, but it's like it's more than that. It's just
It
hard,
is.
because you've kind of got the situation where you want to push things, you want to allow things to develop and just to demonstrate strength as well, but then to actively make that choice and say, nah, I'm not, I'm going to be intentionally a little more conservative, even though I could push it today. Because, you know, when I got out of bed this morning, my knee was achy and yeah, it went away, but, you know, still like let's not completely ignore
Right.
this.
Just because you can doesn't mean you should or that it's the right decision. And that can be
Yeah.
like, that's really hard. We look at our training with RPE and we're auto regulating our training, we're auto regulating load via the use of the RPE tool. And I think in large part, most probably every one of us that uses RPE is guilty of it at some point or another, of strictly using it to add more weight. And we get lost in wanting to use it to add more weight rather than using it also for a tool of creating sustainability through intentional, like holding back just a little bit. Um, and I look at that, I try to ask myself, like, is what I'm doing right now going to be sustainable? Can I keep up at this pace, or do I need to slow it down just a little bit because that creates sustainability? And that can be really important.
Well, it's hard to decouple there's so much emotion that gets tied up into just how your training is going, you know, and that's not a bad thing necessarily either. Like it's something that you care about. Of course, you care and feel something when it's going well and when it's going poorly, but RPE and the decisions that you make in training as much as possible ought to be, based on putting you in a better position, improving your position over time,
Yeah.
not just giving your ego a hug today.
Yeah.
That, and I mean, that comes in a lot of forms too, right? Like I've had people who, they get a little beat up and something is achy or something like that. And they just say, F it, I'm going home, when that's not really the right decision to make. Like maybe there's something we could have done to salvage this. And then there's the other situation too. You're feeling good. And even though you shouldn't, for whatever reason, you throw an extra 5 or 10 kilos on the bar and now we've got other problems to deal with, So so much comes back to good decision making and that just being a thing that's hard to do when you're talking about doing it consistently for a long time.
Yeah. I was chatting with Adam Jones a little bit the other day, and him and I were having some exchanges about lifting in life. And, he tweaked his back the other day, and it was a pretty good little tweak. I had him laid up for a minute, and he was telling me about, being pissed off about it, and not because it derails training, but because it derails life. And, he couldn't go pick up the kids from school because he was in a bit of pain and he had to have Erica, his wife, do it. And some other things that it was being impactful for. And like that's critical. Like that's one of the things I tell him was in the response was, cool, be pissed off, feel every bit of that, and use that emotion to cultivate change in your decision making when you're lifting. And think along the way, when we're in moments like that of like, how does this choice in my training right now impact my life? Because I like being injured sucks from a lifting standpoint, but it sucks more when you can't live life. We're
Yeah,
not,
yeah,
it's a
totally.
hobbyist sport. We're not out there fighting for multi-million-dollar contracts. Like it, so if it's not, to me, if it's not adding value to my life and not allowing me to live my life in a high quality way, then the price isn't worth it. The cost is not worth it.
Yeah. Well, kind of speaking a little bit, like you had some setbacks in your run up to Worlds this year,
Yeah.
right? You had a back injury, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Was that the main one?
The first block, I tweaked my SI joint. And I don't know why. Sometimes, I know a lot of times we want to try and figure out, well, why did this happen so that it doesn't happen again? And well, there's a lot of times we just don't freaking know, and we can't create paralysis by analysis in that way. Like the SI joint tweak in the first block, I was starting out great. I felt real good. And it was week 1, day 2 of my deadlift. I had a great top set. I had some low RP volume back off work, and it was my very last set, my very last rep. And I went to go pull. And I mean, I was doing sets of 6 at 60%. So it was real low key. And man, something shifted in my left SI joint and it hurt. And I didn't lift like competition exercises on week 2. Week 3, I was finally able to start to move them again. And then weeks 4 and 5 were up. So I was actually able to have a rate of gain across the block. And then in the peaking block, week 3 of the peaking block, a 5-week time to peak, week 3, day 3, my SBD, SDE day, squats with bands. I forget which bench I had, and nightmare deadlifts. And again, I had been feeling really, really good and PR'd my squat with band. Felt like I was about to potentially PR my nightmare deadlift and set 1 by 2 at 7. Second rep, I just got out of position. It kind of, I rushed a little bit and bounced off the floor just a little bit, just enough to kind of get me out of position and strained my low back just a little bit. And I'm like, okay, well, that's not so bad. You know, it things happen. It's not ideal timing. I I know that motion is lotion. I have to just keep moving. I don't necessarily have to keep loading things up, but I need to move. My peak might be a little bit not where it was looking, but I know I have my baseline strength is real high right now, and I can rely on that. So we're good. Just in both times, it was really, I suppose, interesting because it was the first time that I got injured in prep where I didn't go, oh shit, no, not this again. It was just, okay, what can I do? And that was like a really cool moment to get to that point of like, oh wow, I'm not panicking. I'm just focusing forward. And I truly believe that getting to that mindset shift was a big part in getting recovered as quickly as I did and being able to still perform in the way I did, because I didn't allow myself to have such a hard negative stress response. If we talk about stress adaptation, well, if I get hurt and then I go, bro, no, I don't want this. Well, that's increasing the stress response of the body. Whereas if I go, okay, what can I do now? I am stopping no longer contributing to the addition of stress in that moment. I stop the flow. Okay, cut it off. Cool. I mean, again, it's not the thing that anybody wants. It's not the thing that's exciting and fun, but it doesn't matter. That's the situation you're in right now. What are you going to do? As they say, life isn't about what happens to you. It's about how you respond to it.
Hey, let me tell you something that I know about you. Your lifting is important to you. It's probably one of your biggest priorities. And for people like us, nothing compares to the feeling that you get when you set a new PR. that feeling of being the best that you've ever been, of doing something that you've never done before. This is what we're all after, and it's also what RTS specializes in. Getting you the absolute best program possible so that you can hit new PRs and reach your goals. We call it radically individualized training, and we're really good at it. Whether we need to account for busy schedules or equipment limitations, or precisely turn the dials and get the details of the program just right, we have the tools and the experience to guide your lifting to the next level. To us, coaching is all about leadership, relationship, and creative problem solving. A coach should be poised to help you make tough decisions about training and competing so that you can continually grow in your development. And of course, a coach should be a first-rate problem solver, especially when it comes to your training, technique, and strategy. Now, all this has to be built off of a really strong, professional coaching relationship that emphasizes trust and respect. Additionally, RTS coaches are not on an island. We have a strong network of professionals to reach out to, so if you find yourself in need of some specific expertise, say in the realm of nutrition or injury management or sports psychology, there's a deep expertise available there too. For more information, go to store.reactivetrainingsystems.com and click on coaching. That's store.reactivetrainingsystems.com, then click on coaching. Hope to see you on the team soon.